Hey, everybody, welcome back to Hardpoints, the podcast about energy security and the startup economy, how they intersect to shape the world around us. Each week, we unpack the real dynamics behind the headlines, what it's changing, what it means, and why it matters to you. Thanks for being here. Neal, it's good to see you, man.
Hey, man. How are you?
I am faded. Uh, so,
Is that a
uh,
Gen Alpha term?
I don't know what term it is. I think I used to use it to refer to like when I was hungover, but now I just feel hungover from work rather than from alcohol. Nonetheless, I feel a little busted up.
Yeah. Why is that? Why are
Uh,
you so busted up?
had a lot of travel. So I went to two events, one in New York City, the other one in Las Vegas, went kind of back to back, and the one in Las Vegas was for the promotional products industry, which we work with. And we found a real niche there where we're doing really well, and I'm really excited about it. Some huge opportunities growing there for us. So, kind of over the moon about it, but it also means like full tilt press or, full court press, full tilt boogie, some mix of metaphors there. You gotta show up and get it done, and cement some of those relationships. So there was that. Got home last night and crashed.
Okay. So it's like you wanted to go to sleep 3 days ago, but you forced yourself to keep going.
Yeah, I have one of those little Garmin watches, and it tracks like the quality of your sleep and um your heart responsiveness, HRV. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's like
Yeah.
this little like data point of like, yep, you are more and more tired. You're not getting great sleep. You're not getting enough of it. You're going, your days are long and fairly stressful. So,
Mhm.
but I'm looking forward to. I'm going skiing with the family this weekend, and since there's not much snow
Wait,
in
you guys have
Colorado,
snow?
not really, but we already kind of reserved the place that we're going to be staying. So if nothing else, it'll be a vacation in the mountains. We'll get some skiing, but it won't be like the epic like what you
Yeah.
kind of hope for in
Not.
Colorado.
Yeah. It'd probably be more like crappy Southern California skiing.
Yeah, that'd be. I was going to say, don't compare it to the East Coast because they're having a great snow year.
Yeah. 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 Well, I can relate somewhat. I was at CES last week. And for the second, I actually probably should write this down at some point, but I think maybe the third year in a row I came back from CES with the crud. So I've been back 6 days and sick for 5 of them, which is, you put 150,000 people all from all over the world into what is a relatively confined space. And so I'm tired, but for a different reason. I've been home and fine, but yeah, the crud sucks.
Yeah, I'm generally a pretty healthy person. Now that I don't have little kids, like they are not bringing home quite so many germs. Man,
Yeah.
I have one story where my kid was crawling around on a public man's floor, and the whole family got sick. Like it was just disgusting.
Oh, that's gross. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it was
definitely.
super gross. Um, but so like I'm generally a pretty healthy sort of person, but like it happens in the winter, especially when you travel, especially when you're in confined spaces. The other thing
Mhm.
I think about is just like I'm I'm kind of I'm against hustle culture as a sort of thing, but you do got to hustle, right?
Mhm.
Um, and I just think about like startups are they're like running a marathon, right? So you can't be you going at sprint speed, the whole time, but it's maybe more like fartleks. Sometimes you gotta sprint, and go heads down, just haul the mail. And
Yeah.
then other times you're kind of catching your breath, but like you're never stopped. Um, so
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah. I hear that. We just had a board meeting yesterday, so that usually entails a bit of a sprint, kind of getting your strategic plan together, getting all the financials fixed up and all of that. So I feel like I'm at the end of one of those sprints, but um I try to keep that mindset. I end up probably failing at it at least half the time because the board meeting was yesterday. I leave for Europe tomorrow, going to Greece. It's a part of that NATO program I mentioned. So,
Mm. NATO, it still exists.
yeah, it still exists. Actually, I wonder. It's probably worth noting that NATO a couple of years ago wasn't really doing much in the defense innovation space, but I think you got to give the current administration some credit if you want to call it credit for, they put the screws to NATO to sort of have more European funding. The NATO allies have realized they can't just rely on US defense innovation anymore. And so NATO is putting some real resources behind defense innovation. So I'm going to Europe because there's a NATO program called Diana. That's an acronym, but it's DI, like Diana, the name. And it comes with funding, and it comes with potential future funding and intros to foreign militaries and all of it. So I'm going down that path because it's an avenue for Heirloom to potentially sell to allied militaries. But I think the change between what NATO was a couple of years ago and what it is today is notable.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess you can give credit to bad actors sometimes. I would give equal credit to Putin for creating the largest land war in Europe in 80 years. So I think there's something to be said there. But yeah, however it came about, like, it's good, right? Like, it's good that the folks that are our allies, that are the front line of like dealing with kind of Russian aggression, and helps us to kind of manage our control of the Arctic. More on that later, I guess. But that they have a robust defense capacity and a robust defense industry. Um, because as a uh, consumer of military hardware for many years, we do have very few people now, very few organizations that are providing that hardware, and there is a constraint on innovations in the U.S. system that's getting better, and I will give credit to the Trump administration for that internally. So excited to see that, but like, we need more innovation. It needs to be faster. We need to do acquisitions better and faster than what we've been doing. Like, this is, so I'm glad to see the Europeans getting into that game too.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of innovation, AI, of course, is at the center of most innovation discussions these days. And the first story I wanted to talk to you about was the U.S. proposal to force tech giants to fund power generation buildouts. So this comes about as we know there's an energy shortage already with electrification, population growth, but AI requires a lot of data center uh, build out as well, and that has put us into many tens of gigawatts. And for people who don't know the difference between a megawatt and a gigawatt, sort of think of about millions and billions. Gigawatts means billions, hundreds of billions of investment needed, and we're about 40 gigawatts behind on an annual basis, sort of for the next several years. The utility grid in America was growing at sort of 2% a year, just sort of steady for the last 40 years. And now we're way behind, and we're predicted to be even further behind. And then the administration has essentially said, like, look, tech giants, Google, OpenAI, Amazon, et cetera, you guys should pay for this. And there's sort of in contrast to those CEOs and founders were all sitting in the front row during Trump's inauguration. He's now putting it to them to write the checks. So I'm sort of curious how you uh, perceive that sort of in the context of this sort of global AI race.
I'm 100% of a supporter of this. I think this is a phenomenal policy. So kudos to the Trump administration on this one. He won't say it, and it's probably not his intent, but it's also like a big climate outcome. So like, that's pretty cool. And I think it's good for the United States. So there's that. The reason, the underlying reason associated with all this is that power prices have been spiking here across the United States, and that's been because you just can't bring on the supply as fast as you can create the demand with AI centers. And so consumers are seeing, all their electricity costs go like way, way up. And when they look at like what all those electricity costs are going, it's just because there's people that are kind of free riders that are consuming a lot of this stuff at rates that are not commensurate with what their consumption is. It's a little counterintuitive because public utility commissions typically regulate the rates, but if you're a bulk buyer, you get a lower price, even if you're the one that's driving all the demand on that and right. So um, I think it's great. The reason I think it's particularly great is um, there's not capacity to bring on fossil fuels that quickly. Like it takes a longer time to build like a coal power plant or to build some of the other stuff. Some of the things that would normally be a little bit faster, like a gas peaker plant or gas turbine, combined cycle gas, which involves gas turbine and boilers, um, is like all those things like require gas turbines. There's not enough supply of gas turbines on the planet. We don't make any of them really here domestically all that much. And so I was talking to a friend who's involved not in AI, but in chip manufacturing. And that person was telling me about how they were looking to build some domestic chip manufacturing things. This also goes to American reindustrialization as well. They were looking to build some of them here in the United States. And in a couple of states, they were looking at double digit percentages of electricity consumption for that state's entire grid, just for the facilities they were looking to build, just for their chips, not even for as those chips are the building of the chips, not even for the chips as they're running through the electricity. And when they were looking at that, I was like, so you're telling me that you got to get real big into the power game here because that's, and that person was like, yep. They were looking at gas turbines and they couldn't find any.
Yeah.
So,
Well, so
yeah.
well, to build on that, I mean, I also want to sort of check in with you. You've railed against America's inability to do anything big. Could this qualify as doing something big?
Um, yeah, it could. And I think that would be great. I I question whether it'll actually get done because if this administration has said all of the above when it comes to power, but has really been leaning heavily into fossil fuels and actually kind of hamstringing the things that can be done quickly, cheaply, fast, more easily, like renewables with batteries. So I question whether we'll actually get it done. But if we get it done, fuck yeah, that'd be great. And I want to do big things. It's definitely like take AI out of the equation here. Like electricity demand was going up. Period. It was
Yeah.
going up because we are electrifying everything, and because that's the fastest way to decarbonize a lot of things. In a lot of ways, also like driving an EV fucking rocks. So, um,
Hmm.
it's super fun. It's fast. All those things. So like electricity demand was going up. And there's only a couple of ways that you can kind of deal with that. You could do it with like a kind of microgrid distributed system where everybody's kind of responsible for their own electricity production and saving it and that's a way that's thinking small and micro. Or you could do something big. And the way capital works in this country, I think doing something big is the way that it needed to happen. And I think that people need to be bearing the externalities of what they're doing to the public when they're, funding the development of AI centers.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, there was some analysis this week too on, I mean, kind of to touch on that point you made about the current administration's emphasis on oil and gas is actually shifting momentum towards China as a leader in clean energy development. And that it just sort of underscores the competition between the US and China with respect to energy dominance. And energy dominance is a stated objective of this administration. So, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but do you have you um, is there a way for the U.S. With the focus on oil and gas? Is there a way for us to win this competition?
The competition for energy production.
Energy dominance. The stated objective of the administration is energy dominance. How do you get there if your focus is oil and gas? Is Venezuela part of that? Because now we're going to, at least in theory, have some access to Venezuelan oil.
Um,
We are a world leader in fracking, so we're accelerating oil and gas production on that front. How do we keep
so
up?
um, We are the world leader on that, but we've already kind of, when it comes to like fracking and gas, like we've already kind of we've already reached most of the resources that we can get fairly affordable. And so one of the things that you would look for from an oil and gas, I was talking to another buddy who works in the oil field. He's more of an upstream guy. And I was talking to him about like how this is looking. And he said, well, you have kind of a natural decline in production of about 3 to 5% per year. And so in an energy dominance mindset here, ignoring all the moral and ethical and legal constraints around Venezuela, there might be a play here of like you need to have oil in order to kind of backfill that decline in production that will be happening in the United States. There's also an investment timeline that's starting to happen on the oil side of things, which is that a lot of the oil, as far as I understand it, again, not an oil and gas here, is that they don't want to do 20 year deals, right? So they actually want to go the opposite of big things. The 10, 20 year deals where it requires a lot of money to develop the oil field, they're not sure they're going to be able to sell it as much over 10 to 20 years, right? So they're looking for kind of the quick wins. And so Venezuela within that construct is also that as well. Like it's a proven oil field that's already got holes in the ground. And if you just repair the pipes, you could probably bring that on. So yeah, maybe that affects a little bit about like for the oil supply there. Us, all the lies that we're telling about like we're going to do it for the benefit of the Venezuelans is not true. How like I just uh, they're opening up an offshore bank account in Qatar for all the money that's coming off of the oil sales, and they put $500 million off of the first tranche of that. So you have to kind of wonder, like, oh, the country that gave the president his own personal airplane that we're just going to ignore the emoluments clause on, that country, that they get the $500 million checking account in order to run this. Like, there's no legal or ethical precedent for any of that. But back to the energy dominance, I think that like you could talk about it as within that construct. But it's stupid. It's stupid because China is fucking taking the technologies that we've invented and we developed, and they're running with them at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And it's going to kill the American auto industry kind of in the longer term because they're not building up the capacity for like what will be the demand like globally. We aren't building up the battery infrastructure and manufacturing capacity domestically because we're hamstringing that. We're not building up the renewables. Like, if you really wanted to dominate on energy, you wouldn't be thinking about a foreign country's oil. You'd be thinking about your own country's soil and where you can put a few solar panels and a few wind turbines. Like, that's how you dominate. Because I think about the China will be, if you're looking to dominate by energy, if you're technology gets cheaper as you get more volume of it, right? Commodities, like there's an up and down based upon the supply and the demand of it. Oil will always be a commodity because that's how you produce it, right? But electricity is not always going to be a commodity because it's connected to the production of it through technology. And so China strategically is setting itself up for having the cheapest energy moving forward, which is going to be heavily focused on renewables. Chinese like emissions peaked last year. So like that's it. Like China's has decoupled their growth from emissions growth. And so strategically, like China will be able to manufacture things not cheaper in the future, not because they have a cheaper labor force, just because they have a cheaper labor force, but also because they have cheaper energy. Because they are going to be increasingly run by renewables on their own soil where they don't have to do a foreign war with all of its legal and ethical and moral complications. They'll just be able to build it all on their own. There's a lot of other legal and ethical and moral complications of the Chinese Communist Party, but this ain't one of them. So that's where I'm at.
Well, so to build on that, there's some legislation now being proposed in the House. This is the Dominance Act, which is, shorthand for energy dominance. And the purpose of it is to sort of diversify outside of the Chinese, what's already now, as you said, invented in America, but now solar cells, batteries, et cetera, made more cheaply in China. And so there's this act, at least in draft form, is it establishes energy security compacts with partner nations centered around rare earths and around mining and around oil and gas resources. It sets up a sort of specific sort of secretary, assistant secretary in this case, I guess, around Bureau of Energy Security, which is an interesting thing. As we're shrinking the federal government, this would actually create a new bureaucratic position, and then it works towards sort of economic growth through energy access. But again, sort of to your point about it, so if it acknowledges in a way, and this is my reading of it, it acknowledges that the Chinese have sort of won the solar and battery race. So let's not try to compete on that front. Let's just double down on fossil fuels, mining, et cetera, and do it by um, being strategic in the US and with partners. Specifically, we're talking about regional partners. Venezuela is not named here, but you can kind of read into it. It's sort of like Canada down into sort of South America. And I'm going to be clear again, this is oil and gas, but it's also mining. It doesn't say coal specifically, but sort of one would read into it that coal would probably be a part of that. So anyway, I don't think it probably changes my overall view of, I mean, this is sort of putting into writing what we've heard Trump say, which is, we don't want to pursue the quote unquote clean energies, even though they're the fastest growing, lowest cost. We're going to do things outside of this, outside of that realm.
I think it's a very mid 20th century mindset. One, if you're building any sort of coal mine outside of the United States, what you're actually doing is killing the American coal industry, because we have lots and lots of coal. There's no reason that we would ever need to leave this country for that. Like, we're kind of
we are opening coal mines here too. That was actually in the news in the last couple of weeks as well. So anyway, but keep going.
Yeah, but so it reminds me of like Brazilian beef, Brazilian and Argentinian beef and soy, which is that like if you're helping to create those markets elsewhere, like the global demand for that stuff is increasingly outside of the United States, and so if you're building that somewhere else, you're going to actually be creating the potential for it to export not to America, because there's enough of it domestically. They can put on rail, they don't have to put it on ships, etc. Living here in Denver, I watch it come down through almost my neighborhood every day, out of the Powder River Basin, running on a train track right through central Denver. Mile-long trains full of coal. There's plenty of coal here. We're making plenty of it. The reason we don't use more of it in the United States is because it's too expensive. And that's mostly driven by renewables, right? So the renewables and then like gas combined cycle plants that can do this a little bit more effectively and more efficiently. That's why coal plants are closing down. They're super dirty. They poison the air and the water, literally poison. Like, that's why you have to worry about all the mercury in fish. And it's not cost effective. There's no fucking reason to use coal for that sort of stuff anymore. And I'd be blown away if we ever see another coal plant built in the United States. So that's the thing on the coal side of it. Oil and gas, same sort of thing, very mid 20th century. Like we've talked about this, it's unknown. There are different industry sources. One of them that say we're pretty near peak oil consumption. Others that say oil consumption will go up over the years. I don't know, maybe. We'll see about that.
We were supposed to be at peak oil in the 70s too. So yeah.
Well, we were supposed to be at peak oil production in the 70s. They thought that there wasn't going to be the ability to extract more oil, and then we invented new technology. I don't think we'll actually ever reach peak oil production, based upon a constraint of extractable resources, but we could be at peak oil consumption because there's going to be competing technologies that may start to look at that. We'll see. I don't know enough on that. Time's going to tell there, but I'm not only just like a Pollyanna kind of optimistic about it there. I do lean more towards we are approaching peak oil consumption. So that's where I think about that. I think about like the rare earth minerals, like that's a thing. And that is the enabling function of all these other technologies that we're going to have to win on. And so I don't want to say that we should give up on battery manufacturing or EV manufacturing. Like, are we just going to give up on any? Like, it used to be that like we would offshore like the cheap, labor intensive manufacturing that there was low margin, and that's kind of how China did its thing. But if we're now starting to offshore the manufacturing of complex things that are, can really work, heavily on automation and like high technology factories, like we've just given up on industry in America. Like that's
Mm,
that's that's the function of it, right?
yeah. I don't know
So
that we've given up, but it feels like this legislation and the rhetoric coming out of the administration feels like we're giving up. I mean, at the same time, we are building battery factories in America. We're doing that. If you read through this legislation, it's very it seems apparent to me that it's like, oh well, let's not invest in that because how we win is actually over here.
I don't,
Um,
I don't think we've given up by any stretch. In theory, that's what the tariffs are all about, though they kind of aren't. But uh, like I don't think we've given up. I don't think we should give up. I don't. American industry is the second most productive in the world after China. Like people don't appreciate that because most of it's pretty high tech and like not a lot of labor jobs associated with that. But that's like high complexity stuff is what we do and we should do and we should continue to do. And electric vehicles are a great example of higher complexity sort of stuff that we should be manufacturing in America. And I don't see any reason why we can't compete with the Chinese on that at all. But also there are new technologies to be developed here, and small modular reactors for like nuclear power is kind of like the next place where this could be going. And you do need access to that. We have pretty good uranium deposits in the United States, so like we probably don't have to go off overseas for a lot of that stuff. And where we do, it'd be like Australia. So maybe we shouldn't poke the finger in the eye of all of our allies. Um, like that's where we would, get more of that stuff. So I would love to see that. That's kind of that big thinking. That would be awesome. But also within that construct, China's building nuclear power plants at a hell of a clip too. Right. So, if we really wanted to like get serious about this sort of stuff, like we'd have like, and this is a great spot for the federal government. We'd be strong about regulatory reform around nuclear power.
mm,
That would be an awesome thing to do. But like, I haven't seen them
yeah,
really like taking up that cause.
it feels. I'll go back to something I said before. It feels like the pendulum is just in full swing back the other direction. Okay, so we we effed up the allowing anybody from anywhere to buy land and build stuff near our critical military infrastructure. And then about 15 years ago, we sort of figured out that the wrong people were buying stuff near our military bases and said, wait, time out. We can't allow that. And then we worked to unwind. Got ahead of that. In a similar way, it feels like in the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, we figured out that globalizing everything, including the raw materials and subassemblies for many of our critical defense capabilities is also now not completely controlled, not completely in our control. And we're fixing it. But we're fixing it in part by nationalizing things. And what I'm hoping is that we end up somewhere in the reasonable middle. Like I don't want the US government, and I've been very clear about this, I don't want the US government to own part of Intel or part of any private corporation, because that is a slippery slope that just doesn't lead to anywhere good. Um, but I also acknowledge the point. I think you just said it, which is like, yeah, like rare earths is a thing, and we should have the ability, the raw materials and the subassemblies, the supply chain to build the critical military capabilities that the country needs. But how do we find a reasonable middle?
Yeah, ain't that the trick? So there's a couple things I think about there. So one is growing up as a kid in Idaho, there was it's been a while since I've thought of this story, so I might be getting the details wrong here. But um, there's a big chunk of land in the middle of the state that's the Frank Church Wilderness, named after the late senator. Um, it's awesome. It's just this huge chunk of wilderness in the middle of the state that like is just wild. and it's great, and it's the largest chunk of wilderness area in the lower 48 states. It's great. But apparently there was also, the critical mineral of bauxite that they needed to mine out of it before it was protected, and part of that protection prevented that from happening. And it wasn't all that critical. It turned out like people were like kind of overemphasized the importance of it because there was a buck to be made. And so I think about that a little bit about it, like is the expediencies of the present need to be balanced with the needs of the future. Um, and some things, when you destroy them, you just never get them back. I think about that a lot with like, some of the nodules that they're talking about doing off of the seafloor, where it's essentially they're strip mining the seafloor. There's a lot of like great metals that are going to be essential for the minerals transition, but we don't even know what we're destroying. We would just be destroying. And so I'm a little conflicted, I have to admit, about it. But the other side of it is sometimes like I think because all this stuff is done overseas, like Americans don't see actually the damage of their consumption. So maybe there's almost a point of like maybe we should be doing this in certain places, and if it's not good enough for us to do it here, we shouldn't be doing it. So there's a component of that, or maybe inventing, working on the technology so we don't need as much of what we're saying there. So I think about that a little bit. Um, but I also think about the idea that what was the question again?
Like, how do we find the reasonable middle?
Of what? The reasonable middle of
The reasonable middle of um, nationalizing corporations versus globalizing the supply chain for critical military
got it. Thanks.
capabilities.
So, but I also think about like when you like globalization to a certain extent is security done cheaply. Like we get paid for national security rather than having to pay for it to a certain extent, right? And we have to spend like the money of the military in order to kind of keep the global supply lines open. But as long as you're not antagonizing your trading partners intentionally and trying to destroy that relationship, they have a strong incentive not to do the same. And so, that was kind of the whole point of globalization is how can you help rise like people in poverty internationally without having to send them a bunch of aid and without having to, take over their country or to do some of these like more heavy handed sort of things. Well, let's just increase trade with them and like let them kind of rise their own boats. And to a certain extent that worked. 1 billion people have come out of poverty since globalization across the planet. 800 million of them were Chinese, right? So that
Oh, I
happened to
didn't
be,
know that.
yeah. So, that happened to like really improve the lives of a lot of people across the planet. And it made them, to a certain extent, it made them a little bit more powerful as a country, but it also made them like a great trading partner. And so like the reasonable middle to me would be is to not antagonize them, but to continue to push them uh, to improve how their governance structures, not to destroy ours. And that to me, that's where I think kind of the reasonable middle.
Yeah, this is not well thought out, but I have in mind more like there's a government agency that just keeps track of this, like has a list of 3,000 things that need to have US production capabilities so we don't get caught in a compromised situation.
Yeah,
And it's like, yeah, go ahead.
that's totally fair. Like, I mean, like there, like, and let's be clear, there are even in this global trade sort of scenario, like we still have national security interests, and we got to manage those, and we need to make sure that. I mean, right now, those national security interests are being overstated and abused to declare emergency powers in so many like ways that they shouldn't. But national security does remain. There are people that want to hurt us, and we need to kind of prevent that, and we need to retain the capacity not only to defend ourselves, but also in a world of globalization to defend the global trade
Yeah.
routes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And this is the Marine in me coming out too. I think I've told this story about Guadalcanal where the Navy decided to protect their ships and the Marines were like, this is why the Marine Corps has an air arm, is because the Marine aviators stayed behind in Guadalcanal to protect the Marines on the ground when The Navy interest was just slightly different than the Marine interest, and therefore you had generals and admirals that just didn't have the same priorities. In the same way, when push comes to shove, the U.S. has to have its own, has to control its own destiny. But anyway, I want to digress all the way back to, we're at a fork in the road, and this administration, this Congress is pulling us now clearly away from the clean energy assets, solar, storage, etc. And if you want a clear marker of that, BP just wrote down $5 billion in green energy assets. And a write down, for those that don't know, basically just means like, we're not putting any more money into this because we're now declaring this $5 billion worth of assets worthless, which is a way to basically take a loss on the balance sheet so that it doesn't get any worse, essentially. So they're divesting from that $5 billion is not a small number.
The thing I think about BP devaluing their stuff is, one, it's probably the right thing for BP to do. Not because of kind of the prevailing sentiment and the winds of that. I'm more of kind of a Warren Buffett here. When people are zigging, you should be zagging when it comes to an investment strategy here. And right now, BP is zigging. And the reason BP is zigging is because they have spent a lot of money and failed to execute. That's the bigger problem with it, is that there are lots and lots of people that are building lots of stuff in renewables. It's a completely different business model than what BP's done before, and they haven't, nor has any of the oil majors really done that. And potentially structurally, they were never equipped to be able to do that because they weren't really willing to do kind of that hard, review of like what their business operations are. So that's what I think about that. I think now's the right time to get into all this. So I've been through a few waves now of clean tech. When I got into carbon offsets, like, not only were carbon offsets getting were they uncool, they were getting less cool by the day. Like, it was kind of in the clean tech 1.0 coming off of that. What ended up happening is we were kind of the only ones standing when the rise started coming again. Right. So this is the opportunity as the suckers get out of the market, like the people that like actually have the vision can get in. So, I think that's kind of where this is at here. Like, all the talk about like EVs, like in the US, like, no, we're actually still consuming a lot of EVs. It's not going down. It's just not going up as fast as like the outlandish projections that everybody was doing. So I think there's that. And globally, it's fucking night and day.
I was
like,
just about to say, it's not happening fast here, but look at other places.
Yeah, I mean, It's just all over the place. And again, we're ceding like all those international markets to the Chinese right now because they can. Yeah. I rode in a BYD one time. You can't import them into the United States because, bald eagles or something. But I was in Mexico City visiting it, just traveling with my family. Rode around in a couple BYDs there. They're nice cars. And they don't cost that much. So nice car, went pretty fast, was comfortable for the family. Like, it would be a great thing for Americans, but we're not concerned about Americans. We're concerned about American profits.
I mean, you said it. I'll say it again. I've never been in a BYD, but I can vouch for EVs are just a better product. They are fast. They're quieter. People love them. This is one of those things where you should just let capitalism reign. And when it does, you're going to find, there are going to be people in Nebraska that don't want an EV because of the range concerns. Fine. And for now, eventually the charging networks will come up and maybe it'll always be a hybrid solution. But I mean, in general, everybody that has an EV loves it. I don't know anybody. I've never met anybody that bought an EV who's like, oh, this is crappy, I'm going back to gas. So yeah, just let capitalism go. But anyway,
I got a kind of funny story about that. I have an employee who lives up in the mountains. He's like, his house is at 10,000 feet, and he will commute into the office. We were mostly a hybrid sort of scenario, so he commutes into the office about once every 2 weeks. His wife has to commute a little bit more, but they, it's like a 45-minute drive. on a good day. And so, he had like the standard mountain vehicles. He had the truck and the 4Runner and the rah, rah, rah. And, it's a great lifestyle, right? Like he's going out, like living in the mountains, and like he takes, took the vehicle in order to be going, down some back dirt roads in order to go take the family, do cool stuff. Like I get it, right? And then Nissan here in the Denver area offered leases on Nissan Leafs for no money down, $50 a month for 24, so effectively like an almost free car for 2 years. And so he and his wife were like, cool, let's go give that a try. We can use that as their commuter car. When they got down there, like they found out that that offer had like a kind of a term limit to it, essentially. So he went back and literally he caused like 6 people to call out of work within his community, who all were like, I'm going to go get this lease. And they all went down and they got themselves that thing. And now all these, mountain people, right, with their thing, they're driving these little Nissan Leafs all over the place. And, so like,
Yeah.
and they all love it. They love this car. Now, there are some real constraints and people have to acknowledge those, right?
Sure.
Which is like the range. And the reason that Nissan Leaf is so cheap is because it's now one of the lowest range vehicles on the market. Recharge rates is kind of slow. But to your point, man, the technology is evolving so quickly now that like it's fairly standard now to have a car with about 300 miles of range. The Hyundai Ioniq 5 like can go from it can effectively recharge on a level 3 charger in about 20 minutes. Like you're starting to get to like gas station levels of how quickly you need to be doing this. And then like, so after a certain point, like actually you start running out of reasons to say no and a whole lot of reasons to say yes. Anyways, that's my story.
Yeah. In addition to the solar and storage EV stuff, the other thing that's happening now is that the administration has canceled almost all of the offshore wind projects on the east coast of the U.S. The ones on the west coast never really got started. And I'm a wind guy, so this hits close to home because offshore wind is one of those things that holds a ton of promise. There's a lot of it deployed in the North Sea in Europe. Almost all of it, like 99% of it's deployed in what's called a fixed bottom scenario, which is to say it's not floating on the ocean surface. It's actually put into the seabed floor. But the administration, because this is in federal waters, they have some jurisdiction here. And they're more or less claiming national security concerns, radar interference with submarines in their defense of the eastern seaboard. So in general, you could say, look, this is probably false pretenses. And the judge, there's been several rulings already that have sort of confirmed that. But what I wanted to sort of bring up here is that I also talked to some of my environmental friends who see the red lights off the coast and hate them. And so this is something that I think this administration sort of tapped into, is like there's this underlying dislike, the big white tall towers and red flashing lights. And the pretense is national security, but really people are kind of going along with it because they're like, yeah, I don't really want those wind turbines anyway.
Yeah, I mean, let's not be children about this. This reminds me of the, that middle, like where's like the middle, like the reasonable sort of person here. And like, renewable energy is far, 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 far cleaner than fossil fuel. And like, it's really not up for debate. And anybody that's debating that actually does.
Wait, Mike, a wind turbine causes more fossil fuels to make the wind turbine than it saves in the long run. Haven't you heard that?
Yeah, the economics, like, it's so bullshit right on its face of it. Like, the economics would, like, if it costs that much in energy in order to produce that, like, you wouldn't get a return on investment from a dollar's perspective. It's just...
I know, but I hear that all the time. So I had to bring it up because I hear that about EVs and wind turbines and all of the analysis. It's not carbon free. Let's be clear about that, because our current industrial processes do emit carbon and you are using heat and other mechanical industrial processes. But most of it says it's about 70% carbon reduction, 75% carbon reduction for EVs. So I just wanted to make that because I get that question all the time.
Yeah, 100%. It's getting better on the EVs too as we clean up the grid, or should be
Yeah.
cleaning up the grid, I guess. So, but yeah, it's just total bullshit, right? But like at the end of the day, like there is no such thing as a perfect solution on the energy front. The most perfect solution would be just to be more efficient, right? Saves us money. We don't have to consume as many resources, and. Um, so, that happens. On the waterfront, as an example of that, for years, they were looking to build a big dam on the Platte River in order to provide water for Denver. And the George H.W. Bush administration killed that dam. And so the Denver Water Board was replaced. And now Denver, with twice the population of what it had at the time, is consuming less water than it was then. Right. So slightly, but still, like twice the population means you're now at half the of the consumption per capita. So it's worth considering that like efficiency is the best option. In the absence of efficiency, though, like renewables, like are the economic option. They are the environmental option. Tastes change, so you may not like the red lights, but um, but nonetheless, like that's what it is. It's worth talking about why the physics of offshore wind is so good too for energy production, which is to say, um, if you think about the arc that a rotor kind of spins in, right? It's the volume of that arc that it is the square of the radius, or excuse me, the area of the arc that it's swinging is the square of the radius. So you have an exponential growth rate for the taller the tower that you can put up for that. So one, bigger arcs means, for the same amount of investment, you can get a lot more energy, right? Two, is a taller arc also gets you out of the surface clutter. And so you have more predictable, stronger winds as you get a little bit higher up. So that's the second part. And then the third is that sea breezes are much more reliable than land breezes. So like offshore wind is a winner. It's the way like the Danish, they have a lot of offshore wind and they have like essentially no footprint for their electric grid now because it's mostly being generated by offshore wind turbines, increasingly the Norwegians, same sort of thing.
Mm.
Relatively small countries.
The Norwegians are hydropower, but you're right about if you've ever flown into Copenhagen in Denmark, you fly by 1,000 wind turbines all out in the water.
Yeah, maybe I was thinking of the Swedes, but anyways, nonetheless, there's a ton of capacity for offshore wind, and that's why a lot of the initial wind was being built there. The U.S. was a laggard in that because we're a laggard. Apparently, that's how we like to be. But we were finally starting to get our act together and to catch up. And this is the sort of thing, this is cheap electricity that would have kept everybody's energy bills down. It would have allowed for energy dominance since we're, all roided out as for the language that we have to use. This is all offshore wind is good for the environment and good for America and good for Americans. Canceling it is none of those.
But here's the let me just pull on that thread about why we were laggards. We were laggards. There's been several projects on the West Coast proposed for more than a decade now. Same on the East Coast. What got in the way, honestly, was a bunch of environmentalists who didn't want to see the seabeds disrupted. And a bunch of other reasons, but primarily to do with interference from environmentalists and the military. I actually spoke to a kind gentleman. This is like late 20 teens about building a project off the coast of California. And he actually pulled me aside. He's like, look, dude, my whole job is just to shut these projects down. Just like the Navy didn't want interference for their warning areas, for their training opportunities, whatever. Which is to say, this wasn't there was just a bunch of bureaucratic stuff in the way. And what the Biden administration did was to clear that out of the way. And it was with the same sort of presidential force that Trump is using to shut these projects down. I would characterize it, and I don't have all the details, but it felt very much like the Biden administration used that same sort of presidential power to say, look, guys, this is happening. The environmentalists need to step aside. The military needs to get out of the way. These projects are going to go forward. And that's what encouraged the industry to put in these billions of dollars of investments and now they're left hanging the bag. I mean, this so part of my where I go with is like in previous lifetimes, presidents used to maybe they didn't agree with the previous decision, but if if it meant if continuity meant something, it didn't always win out. I don't want to suggest that this was utopia before the Trump administration, but continuity mattered on foreign policy and on economic decisions like this. I clearly this administration doesn't care about that on a number of fronts, but anyway, I just to highlight that, like why we were laggards, and then why all of a sudden we stepped forward, really had to do with presidential authority.
Yeah, that presidential authority is a kind of a two-way street, and you deal with it sometimes the wrong way. Obviously, the best possible solution would be Congress would be, in Article 1 authority, the first of equals amongst all the government branches, even though it's abdicated it, would be to create law around that in order to kind of clear it out and move it forward. Um, the military thing's kind of bullshit. Like, I'm a Navy guy, naval aviator at that. And, we never flew down that close to the ocean all that often. There's just not a whole lot of reason for it. If you want to fly close to the surface, you were doing it over land where there's a more dynamic environment, better training. We got those ranges too, so we don't need that over the ocean. Maybe there's a little bit of like ship work that needs to happen there where you need to be able to avoid it, but like you can create operating areas. Like, we're fine. What I would say though is that we want to do big things in this country, right? If we want to do big things, we need to do big things, and we need to kind of clear some of those things out there. And yeah, there are some of the kind of the old school environmentalists that are actually kind of at loggerheads with some of the newer environmentalists that are more concerned about like climate from a perspective rather than a couple other things. I think we can do it all in kind of a balanced way, but moving forward as quickly as possible. I think that's important. But the national security thing, like, we've made those trades before. There's a lot of other things there, like worrying about the radar or the sea space or anything like that. Unless I'm presented with something that I'm missing here, like, I just think that that's just all a canard.
Yeah, my interpretation, and it's just that, was this guy's job was to prevent the start of a trend. There wasn't one specific thing. It was just like, if we let this one go, we're going to have thousands of turbines, and that the Navy can't deal with that. So let's just kill it before it gets started. Again, I'm making some assumptions there, but that's the feeling I got from his job was to just throw up a bureaucratic veil that a little company like us couldn't possibly contend with, and just throw up. This goes back to a broader concept we've been sort of talking about today, which is big things require momentum and big force. But in a society where you've got competing interests, in this case, we just talked about environment and military, but there are many other competing interests, economic and otherwise. Sort of, if you're the Chinese Communist Party, you can use say, I'm going to build a gigawatt of wind over there, and everybody has to comply, versus the sort of system where you've got, at least in theory, checks and balances and certainly competing interests. We're not going to move as fast probably ever as a authoritarian state could.
Well, yeah, but I think about this as like a startup mindset too, right? Like, why do startups win when big companies can't? Right? Why is BP zagging or zigging its way out of sustainable energy while you're zagging on in? Right? Which is it's not just about size; it's about strategic vision and clarity of purpose and execution. And right, ultimately, that comes down to leadership, right? And so, in a startup, you have the ability to get the entire team on board and to push the ball over the goal line, right? But when you're, the CEO of a conglomerate, you've got competing interests, and if your primary revenue driver is associated with the production of oil, like, you would see, reasons to not put your best talent on the other stuff, right? Or to put the full backing behind like that effort, to not put the wood behind the arrow. So I think about it this: the reason the U.S. is getting its ass kicked on this, and let's just fucking be blunt, we're getting our ass kicked. And the reason we're getting our ass kicked on this is because we do not have the leadership or the strategic vision in order to move this forward. And Biden was directionally correct, but failed on the leadership aspect. Part of that could have been his age. A lot of it's the world's hardest job, and when you're about 80, like it's hard to kind of really have the vigor of somebody that might be in their 40s or 50s. And
Yeah,
I
man, you
feel
think
tired,
you're
and
tired.
yeah, and exactly. So we just needed somebody with a little bit of leadership and vision that was willing to kind of push this forward, and
Mm,
to bring Congress and to get all the players together. I've seen it happen
mhm,
in politics. It doesn't have to be this way. We've just allowed it to be.
mm. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to get your take on the sort of Ukraine situation, as has been the case for the all since the war started. We've seen the Russians step up their attacks on energy infrastructure. It's harder this time of year because it's freaking cold in Ukraine right now. And in addition to that, energy aid, sort of emergency energy aid from the sort of alliance has waned. And so relying on that. But I think this sort of highlights the sort of supply chain concerns across the clean energy supply chain because they put up some energy production and then it gets bombed, and then they turn on they've got mobile generators and then those get bombed, and then um, so anyway, I just sort of wanted to tee up how at least you can draw some connections for us. We're seeing it play out real time in Ukraine tied to the supply chain and the ability to build new generation while Russia is actively targeting it, which makes it, a direct threat to lives because they lack heating and the ability to just to go on with the sort of day to day life.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with this. I'm kind of a little conflicted, right? Because it's a little easier to target like a fossil fuel facility, right? Because it tends to be a point, right? Versus like a renewable tends to be a field, right? So you tend to have like a field of solar panels. You tend to have a field of wind turbines, et cetera. And so to a certain extent, that seems to be a higher degree of resilience associated with that. But the flip of it is that it also means it's a bigger area to defend. And so I'm not sure from a energy strategy perspective of working in an active war zone, which is easier. Um, it's definitely easier to distribute fossil fuels if you have short supply chains. We saw what happened with the long ones in Iraq. If you're in, Ukraine, in theory, you control your own territory, versus in Iraq where you weren't in control of all the territory and were, susceptible to IEDs. So, so it maybe has some advantage there. I'm not really sure kind of what to think about it. I do know that what I think about with like Ukraine is that as our support has softened, as the Europeans are having to deploy their own resources to Greenland to defend against America, a NATO ally, and all the rest of it, um, we're taking their eye off the ball. And so they're not putting the full meat of their resources behind what I think is like the most important war in NATO history, effectively. Um, so they're distracted. And so when I look at like what's going to happen with Ukraine, like Zelensky is increasingly isolated. And the grind is going to start to get to them a little bit. And so um, he he's probably going to have to do something big at this point to like change the dynamic of the war because on a geopolitical stage, Putin's outmaneuvered him. And that's in part because we have, an arsonist in the White House. But it's also I think that's actually the main part is that like Putin somehow has gotten the US to agree to effectively the Russian position while we were also supporting Ukraine. And I think like Zelensky is starting to get cornered here. And it makes me
Mm.
sad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few competing things happening, and I'm not sure where to make sense of it because we get reports that Ukraine's got a year left, and then they're going to run out of supplies and money and support and blah blah blah. And then I hear the same report out of the Russians that they've exhausted their coffers. They can't keep paying the exorbitant amounts they're paying to private citizens to join the army, and at the rates that they are losing people. Uh, the reason it gives me pause is because I heard that last year too at about this time, like, oh, 2025 is the last year. This can't go on any further. But I'm hearing that louder maybe this year, that both sides are sort of reaching their end and need it to end. Um, it's hard to interpret. I can say that um, every time I hear a story about the Ukraine will being broken or being disrupted by the fraud scandal that they had, it seems to come back. It snaps back like 10 days later. You're like, oh no, they're not close to giving up. They continue to see this as existential. As I that part I think I understand. But you're right. Let's talk about Greenland, because you mentioned that
Well,
the
before we get into Greenland, I think there's, as you were talking there, it made me think a little bit about like this too, right? Which is like, because I had discounted how much Russia itself is also like dealing with the consequences of this war. And as I got to thinking about that, like what may actually be happening there is that the reason Zelensky wants to keep the press on is because if he fails, the worst case is fairly close to the status quo. And if Putin fails, the worst case is like Zelensky wins, right? Like I don't see like Russia, I believe, has lost even if Zelensky's resources dwindle and Ukraine is no longer able to, like I don't see Russia actually being able to capture Ukraine and hold it anymore. It doesn't have the resources, the manpower in order to be able to hold a whole country. So the best it could do is probably consolidate what it does have and maybe expand it just a little bit, but like that's where it's at. But then I get to thinking about like, because like I think Ukrainians would go full guerrilla at that point and just like shoot Russians whenever if they tried to like occupy more of the landscape. They need to have a front. Um, so I think of that component, but then like the flip of it is that if Putin runs out of steam associated with that, like the Russian lines, they're on the offense. They're the ones with the extended supply lines. They're the ones that are operating in hostile territory. Like that collapses. So like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me as far as Zelensky's game too. Anyways, let's talk about Greenland. How we're going to conquer Greenland, and we're going to buy it at any price or take it by force. Fun, huh?
Yeah, I mean, just as a primer, Trump said he wanted Greenland in his first term. I think in week one of his second term, he said it again. There's been sort of a roller coaster over the last year since he's been in office, and it's cycled between we're just going to take it to we want people's cooperation. I mean, there's 57,000 people that live in Greenland, and they don't even have a military. We already have missile bases there. We already have full rights to do military operations there. I would also characterize it as, look, as global warming is a thing, the polar ice caps are melting, and sea lanes at the top of the bottom of the earth. Well, there are no sea lanes at the bottom of the earth, but the top of the earth, sea lanes are opening, and what used to be impassable will be passable, especially more in the coming decades. So, in the Arctic Circle, which includes parts of Russia, Alaska, Norway, and Greenland, and Canada, and some others, but um, you could see why, if you look at the map, you're like, yeah, we want that. That's a chunk of land that would add to our national security. Um, and yet, um, why? What is it? What does it get us that we don't already have? And what are the costs?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like it's all bullshit. Like we know that, right? Like the whole argument, like, is bullshit. As with everything else about like we're going into Venezuela for a criminal action. Turns out it's mostly for oil. We're like it's just bullshit. And we don't have to buy it because like it's obvious bullshit on its face. We have military access to it with an ally, or at least maybe formerly an ally at this point. Like we're there. Like, matter of fact, we also have a treaty obligation associated with when the U.S. purchased the Virgin Islands. from the Danish government back in, I don't remember, like McKinley time frame, I think. Um,
When was that? Sorry.
Early 20th
Like,
century. Like McKinley was the
okay.
president before Teddy Roosevelt, but he died by assassination and Teddy Roosevelt took over. So like we're talking
Okay.
like right at the turn of the 20th century.
That's like 1890s.
No, I want to
Roosevelt
say it was
was
like,
early 1900s, right?
yeah, I
Okay,
want to,
I'll look it up. Keep going. I'll look it up.
yeah. So anyways, I believe that like when we purchased the U.S. Virgin Islands, part of that contract, part of that deal, that treaty was is that we acknowledged that this was Danish and we weren't going to go after it. So like there's, what does our word matter? So there's that. No, I get it. It was 100 years old, but like the Danish claim to it's like 1,000 years old. It was when the fucking Vikings came over and claimed Greenland. So like, so there's a long history of this being like Danish sovereign territory. It's part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It's an independent, governing structure underneath that. So there's also this component of, you believe in the right of self-determination. Like they don't want to be a part of America either. So what are we going to do? Congress, there was some charlatan in Congress, I don't even remember his name, nor do I want to dignify it, that proposed making Greenland the 51st state, because there's that. Meanwhile, we won't make Puerto Rico or DC a state, so there's that. Like, there's just all these just piles of bullshit that fucking smell and have flies on them, right? We just don't have to accept any of that. So why does he want it, man? That's the question.
Well, well, ego is the easy answer. I look at from a cost benefit. It's clearly more cost than benefit. I think the benefits are um, what I stated before, which is sure it's in an important place. It's important for our national defense. Maybe we get more rare earths and all of that. We already have access to all of those things. The costs, though, are continued separation from, distance from our allies. And I think I come back to something we've talked about a lot on this show, that the Chinese are way bigger, have already more industrial might. The way we compete against China as they rise is with friends. The way we win is equal is only really successful if you imagine that the US does it with friends. And if we do it with friends, we've got all the tools to kick their ass. And if we don't, we're going to be, a third of the size and with fewer tools and less geographical reach, et cetera, et cetera. So I think um, the separation from Europe is troubling. And like I said, it just doesn't buy us that much. It doesn't get us any real benefit. So I will give them credit for, look, there's many things that were just outside of my imagination before. There's some things I'm like, yeah, cool, do that, because that was outside my imagination, but that's actually a pretty good idea. This is not one of them. I just doesn't pencil out.
There's there's no legitimately good reason to be spending this much effort for this much cost. Like it just doesn't. We had the access. We have that. I mean, like, let's also talk about like the wraparound, ignoring Europe. Let's talk about Canada, right? So
Yeah.
now Canada is surrounded on three sides by the United States in this sort of scenario. We've already talked about making them the 51st state. One of the longest borders on the planet is the U.S. border with Canada. I think it might be the longest, and it's undefended, right? So now, are we going to talk about like having to have like a potentially hostile border with Canada? Like, what?
What?
Like, what are we doing here? Like, and like the Canadians, they, I know a lot of Canadians, they're not thrilled about what's going on here. And if you question Canadian resolve because they're a polite people, I would remind you that they were fucking on the beaches in Normandy with us,
Yeah. And
you know,
Vietnam and yeah.
and all over the place. They've been right beside us and they have fucking borne the costs for that. And so if you question whether they'll bear the cost for themselves, they've borne the cost for what they thought was their friend, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. This
So
was our version of what a successful world looked like. They bought into it. They signed up they signed up with their children going to war.
Yeah, they bore the cost. The other thing that I look about this is like, why does he care? He's a real estate guy. So, he
Yeah.
probably gets his jollies off on being able to expand American territory.
Yeah.
The conspiracy, parts of the internet talk about, and there's some truth to this. There's like a company that a bunch of like the Peter Thiels and Elon Musk and Sam Altman invested into called Praxis, which was about like creating this like libertarian paradise, like city sort of thing.
Oh.
And so you can go to their public thing, and then like they're pretty happy about that because they'd long been talking about doing it in Greenland. So
Mhm.
billionaire land.
Mhm.
I don't know how
Mhm.
much I buy that, but a lot of those people are pretty influential in that space, and so they feel like they're playing chess, but what they're really doing is just eating the pieces.
Uh, that's funny. Also, fact check, when William McKinley came into office in 1897, he was assassinated in 1901. So we were right in there.
Nailed it. Fucking look at me for my history buff room here. But I'm not sure. I think it was McKinley. I'm not sure that's when the U.S. Virgin Islands were purchased.
Oh, yeah, I didn't look at that.
Oh, here we go. We'll fact check
All
that
right.
later.
Yeah, last topic, startup economy wise, the startup economy is going in a million different directions right now. Like I have buddies are getting laid off. I hear about, hiring sprees at certain AI companies. There were a bunch of stories this week about, the Australian startup scene has seen a surge in economic activity. That in Latin America, there's lots of capital being attracted for specifically Latin American startups that are, in the fintech and clean mobility and sort of retail intelligence world. I'm just sort of curious what you've been seeing, and if you have any sort of can you this I just say trend wise, we've gone through cycles. It feels like we're going in very different directions all at the same time.
Yeah. Some of the AI stuff that's happening in the startup scene is just creating these crazy revenue growth numbers, just absolutely fucking bananas. I saw a company, I can't even remember the name of it. It was founded 13 months ago and it was acquired for $100 million.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Like if you're looking at it uh, yeah, $100 million valuation at least. So if you typically like in an investor, like roughly buy a chunk of a company because you expect it to grow, or be worth about 5 times that in very short order. So, that company in theory is worth $500 million in a year or two. Like that's just like crazy fast. You see a lot of this stuff. And so, um, it's really kind of skewing a whole bunch of stuff towards AI. And that's happening in Europe too. I'm trying to remember the name of the company that is kind of was doing all the vibe coding and like did a lot of growth, and then it's kind of fallen on its face here recently. So it seems to be like AI has made the expectations in the ecosystem really frothy, where you get big bubbles and then they pop. And so like the same thing for this company that was acquired for $100 million, it could also be worth fucking $0 in about like 6 months. And so there's that. I think about like the European startup ecosystem is probably culturally hampered from the American one, just because of they don't seem to have that same. They don't seem to have that same culture of kind of like what we were talking about at the very opening of the show, like that the fart, like where you're like heads down, just running as fucking hard as you can, and then like when you're done with that, you're not on vacation, you're just catching your breath and still running, And so I think about that a little bit. There's also like not the capital ecosystem for that, and there's different expectations around governance and the fact that it's a confederacy effectively in the EU because you have like different national laws that like have more power than state laws. So I think like the European ecosystem is probably a little bit hampered there, but I kind of wonder the bigger picture for me is like is the existing startup model dead, right? Which is the idea of like you're going to raise your seed round and your Series A and your Series B, and you're going to have venture capitalists that are going to do this. And it all became very structured and formatted. This is how you're going to do it. And with AI coming in, it's kind of blowing apart it, like, because you don't need that many people, you don't need that much money in order to be able to do it. You can build this really frothy bubble sort of like revenue sort of thing where, like, that company that I talked about with $100 million, 6 employees,
Oh my god.
6 fucking employees, and so you're
Oh
like,
my
you don't
gosh.
need
Yeah.
you don't need that much money to build that thing either, right? And so, like, what do you do for venture capital there? So, like, I wonder, I continue to think about, like, what kind of business, if you're going to build a business that matters, you need, and like, I think this happens both at the corporate level, and at the startup level, across the entire business ecosystem. You got to change your vision about, like, where this thing's going. And I think it's got to be built for the long term. And if you are willing to do that, then there's going to be places where you're going to need capital coming in, but it's going to have to be drastically reset off of, like, the expectations that venture capitalists have now, because, like, you're building a business to last for the future. If you're doing something like in the AI world right now, it's mostly a land grab. How can I get as big a chunk of this rapidly growing ecosystem and just kind of hold on for dear fucking life? But there's no proof that the AI will grow as much as they think it will. It may pop. I think there's a lot of opportunities that it could. Um, but so I think, like, there's we're in this period of transition where there's going to be a really deep rethinking about, like, how venture and startups work, from a capital raise standpoint, and whether you even need to have that. At the same time that a lot of LPs are seeing that, like, the risk adjusted returns for their investments there are not worth it, because all these VCs were saying one number and they're actually delivering another, because it's just hard to build a company that lasts.
Yeah. Yeah. It I'll just say a couple of things. I think it to build on your point, I, we're in this rapid growth phase that it feels like as soon as there's a indication, whether it's like the Fed raising interest rates, I know we're far from that, right? We're still probably going to lower interest rates for a couple more cycles, but at some point, if we raise interest rates, or there's some marker that the economy is about to turn or has turned, I think that all that capital just flees and the bubble gets exposed. Um, I think the winners and losers part of this, and you kind of touched on this, is like, if you're an AI, cool. But the venture model has been they tried to apply the venture model to these many different industries, and it doesn't work the same way in every industry, right? So in AI, it's probably uh, just it breaks it in one way, but in hardware, it breaks it another way, and but it all gets sort of bucketed into this one category. And now, one of my mentors was one of the OG VCs back in the 70s, and there were like
Wow. No,
a
that's a guy with
dozen.
vision. That
There's
was
like a
he was a
dozen
VC
VC. Yeah,
before VC as a concept existed. That's fucking OG.
yeah, right. So it's like, if you're there and you're competing against, like, 11 other VCs because there's a dozen total, that's one thing. Um, but now there's hundreds. I don't maybe thousands. I mean, actually, there's thousands. I'm actually, as somebody who's gone out to fundraise, some lists are thousands long, and that's just a lot of competition. Um, I love that it spurs innovation. It gets people like me to try new crazy things, and yet I also I don't know how it translates across these different sectors with the same model, um, and survives these different bubbles. So we're in a capital constrained environment now in some sectors, but not AI, right? But how does that, and part of what I'm getting at here is, like, how does the market make sense of it when there are these so many different um, signals, uh, and then how do you form capital when when there's so much ambiguity and mixed signals?
Yeah, it's a mess. You would obviously know better than me because you played in that space a little bit. And I have not been nearly as good at raising the money as you have too. So there's that. Um, But um, what I would say is that like I think that like the ultimate model of like the massive kind of growth for venture and for startups is dependent, or it used to be at least, on IPOs, on being able to go public, and those have kind of
Yes.
died. They just don't happen
Yeah.
anymore.
Not at the same rate for sure. Oh
Yeah,
my gosh.
and so people are kind of like trying to work around it a little bit. I actually am starting to have questions whether like even in the public corporation, if that's the right model for businesses of that size, even because we don't seem to have like very good governance associated with that, and there's this short termer thinking rather than like building like a corporation that is built for the long term. Um, I think that's a lot of the behavior of all these CEOs that are genuflecting at the altar of Trump. Is because like they're just worried about next quarters instead of like 10 years from now. Right. So I'm just, there's just a lot of things there about like the business ecosystem is in this period of turmoil and changeover. Like in public corporations driving shitification, right? Venture capital to a large size point kind of drives in shitification, right? Because it's about maximizing the revenue in the short term over building the long term, and that only really works in a place where you kind of lack like proper monopoly controls. So there's just like this um there's just this period of like the thing of the 2024 election that made it really really fucking clear to me is that all the institutions of the 20th century were creaking and falling apart, and we let them. We didn't rebuild them, and we let a guy come over and just push him over. And that's kind of what's happening right now, right? He's saying like, Intuit, you want this, or not Intuit, Intel, you want this? Here, 10% of your company, that's mine. Oh, we'll just take a country in Latin America, and then we'll put their money in another country in the Middle East. Like we're just like nobody gives a fuck about anything. Everything was built for the 20th century, and it was all collapsing. Whether it was journalism, religion, business, government, it's all the old world is dying, and the new world is struggling to be born. And the new world will be born. And we're just in this period of transition, which feels super fucking chaotic and awful in a lot of ways because we have thugs on the streets in Minneapolis and we're attacking our own allies and all these things, right? But the new world is being born as we speak. It's just struggling.
Yeah. That's well said, man. I I share your optimism that it will be born, but it's about time. We got to get after it, and we got to build it. It's not going to just get built on its own.
That's it. And so that's back to the venture capitalists. When Mark Andreessen writes, it's time for the builders, that guy doesn't know the first fucking thing about building. Because what he knows about doing is throwing money at something and riding what somebody else is kind of doing and effectively kind of like picking a winner and having the whole ecosystem build around that, right? They're not
He's
actually
not going to
built.
do it, and his AI is going to do it, not even him.
Exactly. That guy doesn't know a goddamn thing about building. What this world needs now is builders. It needs people that are going to build companies that last, communities that last, build government infrastructure that lasts, that's built for the 21st century so we can have the second American century and not just the first. World War II was 80 years ago. We built a system out of a fucking calamity and it was the American century, right? We are now watching that be destroyed. So what are we going to do with it? Are we going to build it or are we going to fade? And right now, giving up is fade. That's where it is. You want to build something that fucking lasts and build it outside of the government. And maybe that's the most American thing we can do, right? Which is that like, we've knocked down and built this country down up multiple times before. Most of the time, the knockdown part came from like something, fairly major, but hopefully we don't have to go through catastrophe like a civil war or a global world war, but that's where we're at. We are in the knockdown phase and it's time to start building.
All right, let's do good, bads, and others. My good this week is that my board meeting's done. Short
Nice.
and sweet. It's just nice to have that behind me. Lots of good feedback from the board. I have a great board. I'm lucky in that way.
Yeah, but
My bad.
even if they're great people and you like seeing them and they give you good feedback, it is work. It's work
It's
to
just a
put
lot
it
of
all
work.
together. You want to make sure you have all your act together. So yeah, good job getting that behind you.
Yeah. My bad. You just mentioned it. The Gestapo being on the streets of Minnesota. Now, look, for my conservative friends that are listening, I know that it's not literally the Gestapo, but they sure as shit look like a Gestapo, and they're acting like the Gestapo. And I'm not a trained police officer, but they act more like thugs than peace officers. They're not de-escalating; they're escalating. Like here's my comment about the Renee shooting is that, like, first of all, I know better. If I was put in that situation, forced to be the ICE officer in that situation, and there was a moving vehicle, I wouldn't walk in front of it. Secondly, she didn't try to kill him. Sorry. It was like, dude, you did get out of the way. So obviously there wasn't really a threat to your life. And secondly, she was trying to maneuver the vehicle to get at to leave. Fine, but there was no malintent. Like that's I know my conservative friends look at that video and see something else, but to me, it's night and day. And it's just tragic. It is exactly what we saw coming when you put the Gestapo on the street, or at least people that look like the Gestapo. Like those motherfuckers need to take their masks off. They need better training. They need to stop agitating and they need to de escalate, not escalate. None of
They
that
need to
is
not
American.
they need to not be there. Like they're not, like
Okay, that too. But I'm just saying, like, all of that is like none of that is productive. It's just a recipe for like it's a recipe for what is happening, which is that people are getting shot, and that's
yeah,
not America.
everything about it. The Renee Good shooting reminded me a little bit of Trayvon Martin, right?
Mm.
So do you remember, for those that aren't familiar,
Yeah.
Trayvon Martin was a young boy. I think he was 17. Who went out, bought something at a convenience store, was walking home, got followed by a self-appointed, community security guy who decided that Martin, because he was black and wearing a hoodie, matched the description of a bad guy. And so he had his weapon, and Florida, it was in Florida, it was a stand your ground state. And so he followed this kid, and this kid, you know, was like, who the fuck is following me? And in his fight or flight decided to fight. And he got shot and killed. Right. And so, and they let the guy that shot him off because it was a stand your ground. But like what happened in this cop thing, or with Renee Good, was kind of the same sort of thing. Like they didn't stand their ground. They actually escalated until they found a reason to, if she wasn't perfect in the exact moment, to kill her. And I fundamentally believe that the person that should be capable of de-escalating the situation is the one that has the training, ostensibly the one that's in that is the public official. They have a higher duty to protect than the person. So even if you want to like build up this perfect thing where where he was afraid for his life and he didn't know what was going on and he had to shoot her, like, I don't care. He had a duty to keep himself out of that situation and to not cause it. There was another one, like I remember a few years ago, of like a cop showed up into a hotel and told this man to get onto his hands and knees and to like crawl towards him, and was just shouting and escalating. And this man was like sobbing as he was crying, crawling along the floor, and his pants were falling down. So he reached to pull his pants up and the cop shot him because he could have been going for a weapon. And it was just like every chance he escalated it until the person that was in the situation could not do the right thing in any way. There was no right answer for Renee Good because they did that to her. And yeah, that's what the Gestapo looked like. There is no right answer. You're just by engaging with us, you're probably fucked.
Yeah. My other, we talked about it, Greenland. I don't get it. I'm interested to see what happens. Of course, I hope we do the right thing. I see senators and other Congress folks getting involved, and I see Denmark here lobbying the Congress this week. It feels very much like we could end up doing the wrong thing here, but I hope we do the right thing.
Yeah. Here. Well, for me, tired as I may be, I had a great conference. I ended up so I work a lot with companies in the promotional products industry. Um, and it's an industry that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be kind of like interested in sustainability, but they're actually doing a lot of things that is fairly leading, especially for companies of their size. There's, don't get me wrong, there's definitely the ones that sell like the cheap schlock that goes straight to the garbage, right? But like there are also a lot of them that are really like leaning heavily into it at, like yeah, outside of the regulatory ecosystem where they're trying to get ahead of this because they know that they need to make more sustainable stuff. So it's really cool to see an industry that's coalescing and starting to do that work. But it's also really cool to feel like I'm a part of it. Um, as I've been doing my entrepreneurial community, career and journey, I've gone to a lot of conferences where people just kind of look at you like, "Who are you? You're the new guy." Um, and I've never ever had that with promo. They've always been like, "Yeah, man, hey, how you doing? Why don't you come over here? Let me tell you about this." They'll even tell you about their competitor and what they're doing, and like, it's just an industry full of a lot of good people, and I'm appreciative of the opportunity to be part of that. I'm going skiing tomorrow, so my bad is that it's going to be metaphorical and actual rough sledding. You know, so yeah, Colorado's having the worst snowpack in its entire history, or recorded at least.
Mm,
And it doesn't look like it's going to be getting a whole lot better. That's really, I've mentioned it before, but super concerning for all of the country because, like, if you live somewhere between the Pacific and the Appalachians, you probably are connected to the Colorado water snowpack,
yeah.
and that's a problem. That's a problem if we don't have enough water.
Mhm.
That's the ag industry in the West is going to have a big reckoning associated with that. So pray for snow is all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
And then my other kind of ties together with my good, which is working in the promo industry. Like, I'm not going to fully disclose what we're working on as far as the product there, but like we have a ton of clarity now about like where we need to be building
Mm,
and the need that's the problems that we're going to be solving associated with that.
mm,
Again, because this is an industry that's so collaborative and willing to kind of like share some of this information.
mhm.
Um, there's a lot of opportunities in product, and I'm really really excited about it. So I'm going to be interested to see where this goes and as the opportunity for the company.
Right on.
We are still a fairly small startup, and so like balancing resources, capacity to be able to manage this, whether we can hit growth associated with it, like because it will be an investment of time and resources. That all remains to be seen, but I have a pretty good degree of confidence on that. So that's the other that I'm
Mm,
doing is I'm just watching to see. I think 26 is going to be the breakout year for Acclimate, and I'm really
mm.
kind of excited about that. But there's a lot of unknowns there, so I got to make sure that I'm keeping all the balls in the air and managing all the resources and managing the relationships and just doing all of it.
Exciting times, man. That's awesome.
Well, we'll see. We'll
Mm.
see at the end of the year show how it all turned out. But anyways, that's it for this episode of Hardpoints. Thanks for listening and for being part of the conversation around energy, national security, and the startup world. If you found today's episode useful or thought provoking, please share us follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and share us wherever you consume social media. Thanks again for joining us. Hardpoints is brought to you by the Valor Media Network, and we'll see you next time.